The scream came from the highway, before the truck even stopped moving. Elena Marsh was running, before she had time to think. Her shoes hit wet asphalt, rain soaking through her jacket, red and blue lights spinning across the dark trees. A black car had folded itself around a guardrail like paper, and a man was pulling himself out of the wreck with blood streaming down the side of his face. He was massive, taller than anyone she had ever treated, and he was walking toward her instead of away from the danger, as if the crushed metal behind him meant nothing at all. "Sir, stop moving. You need to sit down," she said, catching his arm before he collapsed. He looked at her, and for one strange second, the noise of the accident, the sirens, the shouting paramedics, all of it seemed to fade. His eyes were a pale, unnatural gold, and they fixed on her, like she was the only solid thing left in the world. "Elena," he said. She froze. "How do you know my name?" He didn't answer. His knees buckled, and she caught him, guiding him down onto the wet ground, pressing a cloth to the gash above his eyebrow. Around them, other nurses and paramedics moved fast, calling for a second ambulance, but Elena stayed locked in place, her hand against a stranger's skin, feeling a pulse that felt far too strong, far too steady, for a man who had just been in a crash that should have killed him. His name, according to the wallet a paramedic found nearby, was Cade Ashworth. There was no address on the license, no emergency contact, just a name and a photograph of a man whose expression, even in a driver's license photo, looked like a warning. By the time they reached the hospital, Cade's wound had already stopped bleeding. Elena checked it twice, certain she was seeing things under the fluorescent lights, but the skin along his eyebrow had closed into a thin pink line, as if the injury were a week old instead of 20 minutes. "That's not possible," she murmured, more to herself than to him. "You should let it go," Cade said quietly. His voice was low, controlled, like a man used to giving orders and having them followed instantly. "I'm not going to let it go. I'm your nurse. I need to understand what's happening in your body." "You don't," he said. "Trust me." Elena had worked 12-hour shifts for 6 years. She had seen gunshot wounds, car accidents, heart attacks, and every kind of human suffering the night could offer, and not once had a patient looked at her the way Cade Ashworth did now, like she was something rare and dangerous he hadn't expected to find. "I'm calling for a doctor to look at this," she said, straightening. "No doctor is going to explain it," Cade said. "Just let me leave. You were just in a serious accident. You're not leaving." For a moment, something flickered across his face. Frustration, maybe even amusement, like he wasn't used to being told no. Then he exhaled and sat back against the hospital bed, watching her the way a man watches a storm he can't stop. "Fine," he said. "One night." Elena told herself it was simple curiosity that kept her checking on him every hour, instead of every 4, the way protocol required. She told herself it was professional concern that made her linger by his door longer than necessary, watching the rise and fall of his chest, the way his shoulders never seemed to fully relax, even in sleep, like his body was always braced for an attack that hadn't come yet. At 2 in the morning, she found him sitting up, staring out the window at the parking lot, his jaw tight. "You should be resting," she said. "I don't rest," Cade answered. "Everyone rests. Not people like me." She stepped closer, arms crossed, studying him with the same clinical patience she used on frightened patients. "What kind of people are you?" He turned his head slowly, and there was something ancient in his eyes, something that made the hair on her arms rise. "The kind you should stay away from, Elena Marsh." Her name, again, spoken like he had known it for years. "You keep saying my name like we've met before," she said. "We haven't." "No," he agreed. "We haven't." "Then how?" "Some things you feel before you understand them," he said, cutting her off, his voice rough. "You'll understand eventually, not tonight." She wanted to press further, but a code blue rang out down the hallway, and instinct pulled her away before she could ask anything else. By the time her shift ended at dawn, Cade Ashworth was gone. No discharge paperwork. No trace, except for the folded hospital gown left neatly on the bed, and a single word written on a napkin on the nightstand. Later. Elena stared at that word for a long time before she threw the napkin away, telling herself it meant nothing. 3 days passed before she saw him again. She was walking home from a double shift, exhaustion pulling at every muscle, when she noticed the same black car, repaired now, parked across from her apartment building. She slowed her steps, heart hammering, half expecting to find it empty. Instead, Cade stepped out, dressed in a dark coat that made him look even larger against the evening light, his golden eyes catching the street lamp glow. "You're following me," she said, more astonished than afraid. "I'm making sure you're safe." "I don't need protecting. I don't even know you." "You will," he said simply. There was no arrogance in the way he said it, only certainty. The same unshakable calm he'd shown in the hospital, while his own blood dripped down his face. It unsettled her more than any threat could have. "Who are you?" she asked, stepping closer despite every instinct screaming at her to stay back. "Really?" Cade studied her for a long moment, as if weighing how much truth she could hold without breaking. "Someone people are afraid of," he said, "for very good reasons. You don't scare me." The corner of his mouth lifted, just barely, the first real expression she had seen from him. "That," he said, "is exactly the problem." A gust of wind moved through the street, carrying the smell of rain, and for a heartbeat, Elena thought she saw something shift in his eyes, gold deepening into something darker, something with a pull she couldn't explain. Then it passed, and he was simply a tall, tired-looking man standing in the cold. "You should go inside," he said. "It isn't safe out here tonight." "Is that a threat?" "It's a fact." He glanced down the street, toward the shadows gathering at the edge of the streetlights, his body going rigid, alert, like a soldier sensing an ambush before it happened. "Go inside, Elena, now." Something in his voice, low and urgent, made her obey without arguing. She hurried up the steps to her building, glancing back once. Cade was still standing there, watching the street, like he expected something to come out of the dark and challenge him. For the first time, she noticed how still the neighborhood had gone. No cars, no voices, not even the usual bark of the dog 2 doors down. She locked her door, leaned against it, and pressed a hand to her chest, trying to slow her racing heart. Her grandmother's voice drifted from the next room, thin and tired. "Elena, is that you?" "Yes, Grandma, I'm home." Elena walked in to find Margaret sitting up in bed, her frail hands folded over a blanket, eyes bright, despite the illness that had been stealing her strength for months. Caring for her grandmother was the only thing that kept Elena's exhausting schedule bearable. The quiet nights of tea, and old stories, a reminder of why she pushed through every impossible shift. "You look pale," Margaret said. "Did something happen?" Elena hesitated, thinking of golden eyes, and a man who healed too fast to be human, of a warning that had emptied an entire street in seconds. "I think I met someone strange tonight," she finally admitted. Margaret smiled faintly, the kind of smile that held more knowledge than her granddaughter realized. "Strange how?" "I don't know yet," Elena said, sitting on the edge of the bed. "But I don't think it's over." Sleep did not come easily that night. Elena lay awake staring at the ceiling, replaying the strange golden color of Cade's eyes, the way the street had emptied so completely, so suddenly, as if the whole neighborhood had sensed something she couldn't see. When she finally drifted off, her dreams were filled with amber light and the low, steady sound of a heartbeat that wasn't her own. Her shift the next morning began ordinarily enough, the usual rush of minor injuries and tired complaints that filled a weekday morning in the emergency room. But her coworker Priya noticed the difference immediately, catching Elena staring blankly at a chart for nearly a full minute before speaking. "You're somewhere else today," Priya said, nudging her gently. "Rough night?" "Something like that," Elena admitted, forcing her attention back to the patient file in front of her. "Do you ever get the feeling something's about to change? Like the ordinary version of your life is running out of time?" Priya raised an eyebrow. "That's oddly specific. Did something happen?" "I don't even know how to explain it," Elena said, shaking her head. "Never mind, long week." She kept working, kept smiling at patients, kept moving through the motions of a life that suddenly felt smaller than it had a few days earlier, like she had glimpsed a much larger world through a cracked door and couldn't stop wondering what waited on the other side of it. Twice during her shift, she caught herself glancing toward the ambulance bay, half expecting to see a black car parked just beyond the glass doors. It wasn't there, not yet. By the time she clocked out, Dusk was settling over the city, streetlights flickering on one by one as she walked toward the bus stop instead of taking her usual route home, needing the extra time to think. Her phone buzzed with a message from her grandmother, asking when she'd be home for dinner, and Elena typed back a quick reply, grounding herself in the familiar comfort of small, ordinary things. She hadn't gone 2 blocks before the sensation returned, the prickling awareness of being watched that she now recognized instantly. She turned, expecting to see Cade, and instead found an unfamiliar man leaning casually against a lamppost, watching her with sharp, assessing eyes that held none of the warmth Cade's had. "You've caught someone's attention," the stranger said, his voice carrying an odd, layered quality, almost like 2 voices speaking at once. "That's rarely good news for a human." Elena's pulse spiked. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Sure you do." He pushed off the lamppost, taking a slow step toward her. "Word travels fast in our world. The Ashworth Alpha doesn't stop for accidents. He doesn't visit hospitals. And he certainly doesn't leave a trail as obvious as the one he left around you this week. Who are you?" "Someone curious," the man said, tilting his head. "Someone who wonders what a human girl has that made the most controlled alpha in a generation lose his composure so completely." Before Elena could respond, a low growl rumbled from the shadows of the alley beside them, and the stranger's expression shifted instantly from curiosity to caution. He held up both hands, taking a slow step backward. "Just looking," he said, directing his words past Elena toward whoever, or whatever had made that sound. No harm meant. He disappeared around the corner without another word, leaving Elena standing alone on the sidewalk, heart pounding, staring into the alley where the growl had come from. No one emerged. After a long moment, she forced herself to keep walking, faster now, until she reached her building and locked the door firmly behind her. Outside, in the cold night air, Cade remained on the street long after Elena's light switched off in the window above him. He could still hear her heartbeat, steady now, calmer, even through brick and glass. It had been years since anything had reached him this way, years since he'd allowed anyone close enough to matter. He had spent his whole life being feared, a name that ended arguments before they started, an alpha whose reputation kept entire packs from crossing into his territory. He had built himself into a weapon, cold and controlled, because the alternative, the cost of caring about anyone, had already been paid once, in blood, a long time ago. And yet here he was, standing outside the apartment of a human woman who had no idea what he was, unable to make himself leave. His phone buzzed in his pocket. A single message from Dorian, his second in command. "They know she exists. Movement near the east border tonight." Cade's jaw tightened. He looked up one last time at Elena's darkened window, feeling the pull of the bond settle deeper into his chest, impossible to ignore now that it had started. "Not tonight," he murmured to the empty street, a promise meant for no one but himself. "Not while I still have breath in me." Then he turned and disappeared into the dark, leaving no sound behind him at all. Elena told her grandmother about the stranger by the lamppost the next morning, unable to keep the unsettling encounter to herself any longer. Margaret listened quietly, stirring her tea with slow, deliberate movements, her expression far calmer than Elena expected. "You don't seem surprised," Elena said, studying her grandmother carefully. "I lived a long life before you were born," Margaret said simply. "I've heard stories about packs and alphas since I was a girl myself, whispered by people who claimed to have seen things they couldn't explain. I always assumed they were just stories." She reached over, patting Elena's hand gently. "It seems I was wrong." "You're not frightened?" "I'm cautious," Margaret corrected. "There's a difference. Fear makes people foolish. Caution keeps them alive." She studied Elena's face for a long moment. "This man, the one who found you after the accident, does he frighten you?" Elena considered the question honestly. "No," she admitted. "He doesn't," which might be the strangest part of all of this. Margaret smiled faintly, the kind of knowing smile that made Elena wonder just how much her grandmother had already guessed. "Trust that feeling," she said. "It's rarely wrong." Elena did not see Cade again for a week, though she felt him everywhere. She would catch a glimpse of a dark car at the end of her street, a tall shape near the hospital parking garage, gone the moment she turned to look directly at it. She told herself she was imagining things, That exhaustion was playing tricks on her mind, but the feeling never left her, the sense of being watched by something that meant her no harm. On a Tuesday night, 3 men followed her out of the hospital parking garage. She noticed them the way she noticed everything now, with a heightened awareness that hadn't existed a week ago. They kept pace behind her, not speaking, moving with a silence that didn't match their heavy build. Elena quickened her steps, fumbling for her keys, her heart slamming against her ribs. "Elena Marsh," one of them said, his voice carrying an odd, rough edge, almost like a growl beneath the words. "The Alpha's mate. We've been looking for you." She spun around, back pressed against her car door, adrenaline flooding her limbs. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Leave me alone." "You smell like him," another said, stepping closer, his eyes flashing an unnatural amber in the dim garage light. "That's all the confirmation we need." Before she could scream, a shadow moved between them and her, faster than her eyes could track. Cade appeared as if he had been standing there all along, though the space had been empty a heartbeat earlier. His presence changed the entire garage, the temperature seeming to drop, the air growing thick with tension. "Walk away," Cade said, his voice low and terrifyingly calm. "This is the only warning you get." The 3 men hesitated, and for the first time, Elena saw real fear pass across their faces. One of them straightened, trying to hold his ground. "Damon sent us. He wants proof the rumors are true." "Then tell Damon," Cade said, stepping forward, his shoulders squared, his golden eyes darkening into something that looked almost black in the shadows, "that if he sends anyone near her again, I will personally deliver his answer myself, and he will not survive the conversation." The threat in his voice was not loud, but it carried a weight that made the men take a step back. Within seconds, they retreated into the darkness of the garage, disappearing as quickly as they had come. Elena's knees nearly gave out, but Cade caught her before she could fall, his hands steady and warm against her arms. "Are you hurt?" he asked, scanning her face, her hands, checking for injury with a focus that made her breath catch. "I'm fine," she managed. "What just happened? Who was that? What did he mean?" "Your mate." Cade's jaw tightened. He glanced around the empty garage, then guided her gently toward a quiet corner near the stairwell, away from any cameras or prying eyes. "I need you to listen to me, and I need you to not run, even though every instinct is going to tell you to. Cade, you're scaring me." "I know." His voice softened, just slightly, an admission that cost him something. "My name is Cade Ashworth. I am the Alpha of the Ashworth Pack, one of the oldest and most powerful werewolf packs in existence. What you just saw, the way those men moved, the way their eyes changed, that was real. All of it is real." Elena stared at him, waiting for the punchline, for some rational explanation that would make sense of the golden eyes, the wound that healed in minutes, the way 3 grown men had fled at the sound of his voice. No explanation came, only the steady, unblinking honesty in his expression. "Werewolves," she repeated, testing the word like it belonged to a language she didn't speak. "Yes. And you're saying I'm your mate?" "Yes," Cade said again, quieter this time, as if the word itself carried weight he wasn't used to admitting out loud. "It isn't something either of us chose. It's a bond, older than either of our lives, one that connects us whether we want it or not. I fought against it the moment I felt it, because a mate is a weakness in my world, a target for every enemy who wants to hurt me. I tried to stay away from you." "You weren't very good at that," Elena said, a shaky, disbelieving laugh escaping her, despite the fear still coursing through her veins. Something in Cade's expression eased slightly at that, a flicker of warmth breaking through the granite calm he wore like armor. "No," he admitted, "I wasn't. Those men, they work for someone named Damon. Damon Cole, Alpha of a rival pack, and someone who has wanted my territory for a very long time. If he learns for certain that I have a mate, especially a human mate, he will see it as an opportunity, a way to weaken me, to force concessions, or worse. Worse meaning he'll hurt me." Cade's eyes darkened again, and this time Elena understood the change for what it was, not a threat toward her, but a promise of violence against anyone who dared to try. He will not get the chance. "This is insane," Elena whispered, pressing her palms against her eyes, as if she could rub the last 20 minutes out of existence. I'm a nurse. I go to work. I take care of my grandmother. I pay my bills late. And now you're telling me werewolves exist, and one of them wants to use me as a weapon against another one. I know it's a lot. A lot, she repeated, letting out a disbelieving breath. That's one word for it. Cade reached out, hesitant, as though unsure whether he had the right, and gently took her hand. The moment his skin touched hers, something settled in Elena's chest. A strange calm spreading through her despite the chaos of the last hour, like her body recognized something her mind hadn't caught up to yet. I won't force you to accept any of this, Cade said, but I can't walk away and pretend those men won't come back. You're in danger now, whether you believe in any of it or not, simply because of what you are to me. I need to take you somewhere safe. Safe like a police station? Because I'm not sure a badge is going to help against glowing eyes and inhuman speed. Safe like my territory, Cade said. Somewhere Damon's men can't reach you without starting a war he isn't ready for yet. Elena hesitated, glancing toward her apartment building, thinking of her grandmother waiting inside, frail and unaware of the danger that had just found its way into their lives. I can't just leave. My grandmother needs me. She's sick, and she has no one else. Something shifted in Cade's expression, understanding rather than impatience. Then we protect her too, he said simply, as if it were the most obvious solution in the world. My pack has resources you can't imagine. Doctors who have treated conditions modern medicine has given up on. If it will convince you to trust me, I will personally make sure your grandmother receives the best care available, human or otherwise. Elena searched his face for any sign of manipulation, any hint that his offer was a trick to get her compliance, but she found none. Only sincerity, raw and unpracticed, like a man who wasn't used to bargaining for anyone's trust, because he had rarely needed to before. Why me? She asked quietly. Out of everyone in the world, why is the bond pointing to me? I don't know, Cade admitted. Fate doesn't explain itself, it simply decides, and the rest of us are left to live with the consequences. He paused, his thumb tracing an absent, gentle line across her knuckles. I spent years believing I would never have a mate, that I was built only for leading and fighting, nothing softer than that. Then I woke up in a hospital bed with your hands on my skin, and for the first time in longer than I can remember, I wasn't thinking about the next threat. I was thinking about you. Elena's breath caught at the honesty in his voice, at the vulnerability he clearly wasn't used to showing anyone. Whatever fear still lingered in her chest began to shift into something else, something more complicated, curiosity braided together with a pull she couldn't fully explain or deny. There's something else, Elena said, remembering the stranger from the night before. Someone else approached me last night. A man by my building. He said word was already spreading about you and me. Cade went very still. Describe him. Tall, dark hair, spoke like there were two voices layered on top of each other. He backed off fast when he heard something growl from an alley. That would have been one of my scouts, Cade said, jaw tightening. I've had someone watching your building since the night of the accident. As for the man you described, that could be any number of people. Freelance information brokers who sell rumors to whichever pack pays best. If Damon didn't already suspect something before, he does now. This is moving faster than I can keep up with, Elena admitted. I know, Cade said, and for a moment, genuine regret colored his expression. I wish I could give you more time to adjust, before the danger caught up to us. That isn't a luxury either of us has right now. Okay, she said finally, the word trembling slightly on her tongue. Tell me what happens next. Cade's shoulders eased, the first real relief she had seen from him since the night of the crash. Next, he said, I make sure you and your grandmother are safe. And then I make sure Damon understands exactly what will happen if he tries this again. Behind them, in the shadows of the parking garage, a small camera blinked its red light once before going dark, unnoticed by either of them, capturing every word of the conversation for someone waiting far away to hear. The car that came for Elena and her grandmother arrived before sunrise, sleek and black, driven by a woman named Grace, who introduced herself with a firm handshake and a watchful gaze that scanned the street twice before allowing anyone to step outside. Is this really necessary? Margaret asked, wrapped in blankets despite the mild morning air, her sharp eyes studying the car, the driver, and the two silent men standing guard near the building entrance. Yes, Elena said, surprising herself with how certain she sounded. It is. The drive out of the city took almost 2 hours, the buildings giving way to hills, then forest, then a long private road that wound through trees so old and dense that sunlight barely reached the ground beneath them. Elena watched the scenery change through the window, her grandmother dozing beside her, and tried to steady the storm of questions racing through her mind. The pack house, when it finally came into view, was not what she expected. She had imagined something cold and fortress-like, but instead found a sprawling estate built from stone and dark wood, warm light glowing from dozens of windows despite the early hour, smoke curling from a chimney into the pale sky. Dozens of people moved across the grounds, some jogging in pairs, others carrying supplies toward outbuildings, all of them pausing briefly to watch the car pass, their eyes following Elena with open curiosity. Cade was waiting on the front steps when the car stopped, dressed simply in dark clothes, his expression unreadable until his eyes found Elena through the window. Something in his posture eased instantly, tension draining from his shoulders the moment he saw she was safe. "You made good time," he said, opening her door himself before the driver could move. "Your driver doesn't believe in speed limits," Elena replied, glancing toward Grace, who offered an unapologetic shrug. Cade's attention shifted to Margaret as she was helped from the car, his expression gentling into something careful and respectful. "Mrs. Marsh, thank you for trusting me enough to come here." "I didn't have much choice," Margaret said, studying him with the same sharp assessment she gave everyone. "But I'll admit, you don't look like the kind of man who breaks promises easily." "I intend to prove that," Cade said. True to his word, Margaret was settled into a private room on the ground floor, where a pack physician named Nathan, a quiet, careful man with steady hands, began reviewing her medical history within the hour. Elena stood in the doorway, watching him work, feeling something in her chest loosen slightly, for the first time since the parking garage confrontation. "He's good," Cade said, appearing beside her. "One of the best doctors I have. If there's anything modern medicine and pack knowledge combined can do for her condition, he'll find it." "Thank you," Elena said quietly. "For this. For all of it. You don't need to thank me for protecting what matters to you." Cade paused, then added, more carefully, "It matters to me too, now." Elena turned to study him, searching for the cold, distant alpha the rest of the world seemed to fear, and finding instead a man standing a little too still, a little too careful with his words, as if he wasn't entirely sure how to exist in this softer version of himself. "Show me around?" she asked. "If werewolves really exist, I'd like to understand more about the world I apparently just joined." Cade's mouth curved into the first full smile she had seen from him, brief but real. "This way." They stopped first at the training yard, where a young woman named Sasha was working through a series of drills, under the watchful eye of an instructor. She caught sight of Elena and jogged over, wiping sweat from her brow, curiosity plain on her face. "So you're the one everyone's talking about," Sasha said, grinning. "The human who made the Alpha stop for a car crash." "Sasha," Cade said, a note of warning in his voice, though it lacked any real heat. "What? It's true. You haven't taken a day off in 3 years, and suddenly you're giving hospital tours." Sasha turned back to Elena, undeterred. "For what it's worth, whatever you're doing, keep doing it. He's been almost pleasant this week." "Almost," Elena repeated, glancing sideways at Cade, who looked distinctly uncomfortable with the attention. "Don't let it go to your head," he muttered, though the corner of his mouth twitched upward. They continued past the training yard, toward a long building that turned out to be a shared dining hall, tables scattered with pack members eating a late breakfast, laughter and conversation filling the space with an easy warmth that surprised Elena. She had expected something more formal, more militaristic, given everything she had learned about pack hierarchy and danger. "It isn't always tension and strategy," Cade explained, noticing her expression. "A pack is also a family, in every sense of the word. People raise children here, celebrate birthdays, grieve losses together. The danger is real, but so is everything else." "It's beautiful," Elena said honestly, watching an older woman laugh at something a teenager said, before ruffling his hair affectionately. "I didn't expect that." "Most people don't," Cade admitted. "The stories that reach the human world focus on the danger, the violence, the things that frighten people. They rarely mention this part. Elena filed the observation away, understanding a little more with every passing minute, just how much complexity existed beneath the fearsome reputation that preceded him everywhere he went. He led her through the estate, explaining pieces of pack life as they walked, the hierarchy of ranks, the responsibilities each member carried, the ancient laws that govern territory and conflict between packs. Elena listened carefully, asking sharp, practical questions that seemed to catch him off guard. Questions about safety protocols, about medical care for pack members, about how injuries were handled when the usual rules of biology didn't apply. "You think like someone used to solving problems," Kate observed, as they walked past a training yard where several pack members sparred, their movements fast and precise. "I've spent 6 years in an emergency room," Elena said. "Problems are the only thing that ever slows down long enough for me to solve them." "Is that why you took the job? To solve things?" Elena considered the question, watching two fighters break apart, breathing hard, before resetting into position. "My mother died when I was young. Sudden, nothing anyone could have prevented. I think some part of me became a nurse because I couldn't save her, and I needed to believe I could save someone." Cade's expression shifted, something heavy and understanding passing behind his eyes. "I know something about carrying weight like that." "Your family?" Elena asked gently, remembering the flash of grief she had seen cross his face once before. His jaw tightened, and for a moment, she thought he would deflect the question entirely, the way he had deflected every question about his past since they'd met. Instead, he exhaled slowly, his voice quieter than she had heard it before. "Not today," he said. "That story doesn't have an easy version. I'll tell you, but not standing here in the sun pretending everything is simple." "Okay," Elena said, respecting the boundary without pushing further. "Whenever you're ready." They continued walking, the silence between them comfortable rather than strained, until they reached a quiet garden at the edge of the property, flowers blooming despite the late season, a small stone bench positioned beneath an old oak tree. "This was my mother's garden," Cade said, surprising her with the offering. She used to say a pack could survive without weapons, but never without something worth protecting. "She sounds wise." She was. His voice caught slightly on the word "was," and Elena didn't press further, sensing the weight behind that single syllable. They sat together on the bench, the afternoon sun warm, despite the cool breeze moving through the garden, and for a while, neither of them spoke. Elena found herself studying his profile, the sharp lines of his face, the tension that never fully left his shoulders even in stillness, and wondered how long it had been since anyone had simply sat with him like this, without fear, without agenda. "Can I ask you something?" she said eventually. "Always. Those men in the parking garage. They called me your mate before either of us had said the word out loud. How does that work? Do you just know?" Cade nodded slowly. "The bond has a scent, a signature, something only others of my kind can sense. The moment I found you, it marked you as mine, in a way that can't be hidden or denied, whether either of us wanted it or not. That sounds like it takes away a lot of choice." "It does. And it doesn't," Cade said thoughtfully. "The bond decided who you were to me. But everything after that, how I treat you, whether I earn your trust, whether this becomes something real instead of just fate's decision, that part is still entirely a choice. I could have ignored the bond. Many alphas do, when it's inconvenient. I chose not to." He turned to look at her fully then, his golden eyes steady and unflinching, "Because for the first time in years, something in me stopped being afraid the moment I found you. I didn't understand it at first. I still don't fully understand it, but I know I'm not willing to lose it." Elena's breath caught at the raw honesty in his voice, at the way his usual iron control seemed to crack slightly around the edges when he spoke about her. Before she could respond, a sharp buzz interrupted the moment, Cade's phone vibrating urgently in his pocket. His expression shifted instantly, the softness disappearing behind a wall of focused alertness. "What is it?" Elena asked, watching him read the message, his jaw tightening with every second. "Damon's pack was spotted near our eastern border an hour ago," Cade said, standing abruptly. "3 scouts, moving fast, retreating before my patrol could engage them." "Scouting," Elena repeated. "For what?" Cade's expression darkened, the golden warmth in his eyes shifting into something colder, more dangerous. "For you," he said simply. They know exactly where you are now, and exactly what you mean to me, which means Damon isn't planning to wait much longer before he makes his move. The garden, moments ago peaceful and warm, suddenly felt fragile, a small pocket of calm surrounded by a danger neither of them could ignore any longer. The alarm bell rang across the estate before dawn, sharp and relentless, pulling Elena out of a restless sleep. She bolted upright, heart racing, momentarily unsure where she was, until the events of the past 2 days rushed back into focus. Through her window, she saw pack members sprinting across the grounds, forming defensive lines near the tree line, their movements fast and coordinated, like soldiers responding to a drill they had practiced 100 times before. Cade burst through her door moments later, already dressed, his expression carved from stone. "Stay in this room. Lock the door behind me. Do not open it for anyone except me, Dorian, or Grace." "What's happening?" "Damon's forces crossed the border 20 minutes ago. This isn't a scouting party anymore." His voice was tight, controlled, but Elena could see the barely restrained fury simmering beneath his calm exterior. "I need you safe while I handle this. My grandmother, already moved to the reinforced wing with Nathan. She's protected." Cade crossed the room in 2 strides, cupping Elena's face gently, despite the urgency radiating off him. "I need you to trust me. I will end this quickly." Before she could respond, he was gone, the door clicking shut behind him, followed by the sound of his footsteps disappearing down the hallway. Elena stood frozen for a moment, adrenaline and fear warring inside her chest, before her nursing instincts kicked in, sharp and practical despite the impossible circumstances. If there was fighting, there would be injuries, and she was not going to sit locked in a room while people bled somewhere she couldn't reach them. She found a first aid kit in the bathroom cabinet, stocked far more thoroughly than any ordinary household supply, and slung it over her shoulder before creeping toward the window. Outside, she could see flashes of movement at the tree line, shapes too fast to be entirely human, snarls and shouted commands echoing across the grounds. A knock came at her door, 3 sharp raps followed by a pause, then 2 more. Grace's voice followed, low and urgent. "Elena, it's me. Open up." Elena unlocked the door to find Grace breathing hard, a shallow cut along her forearm, her eyes scanning the hallway behind her before stepping inside. "Nathan's overwhelmed at the medical station, non-lethal injuries mostly, but he needs another set of hands who won't panic at the sight of blood." "I don't panic," Elena said immediately, grabbing her kit. "Take me to him." They moved quickly through the estate's lower level, past reinforced doors and armed pack members, until they reached a converted room, now serving as a makeshift trauma center. Nathan looked up as they entered, relief flashing across his exhausted face at the sight of reinforcement. "Pressure wound, left side," he said without preamble, gesturing toward a young pack member gritting his teeth against the pain. "I need hands while I handle the more serious case in the corner." Elena didn't hesitate, falling into the rhythm she knew better than almost anything else in her life, applying pressure, checking vitals, calming frightened patients with a steady voice, honed by years of emergency room chaos. The wounds here healed faster than any human patient she had ever treated, torn skin knitting back together within minutes once properly cleaned and bound. But the pain and fear in her patient's eyes were achingly familiar, and she treated each of them with the same fierce focus she gave every person who came through her hospital doors. Outside, the sounds of battle continued, distant snarls and the sharp crack of impact, but inside the medical room, Elena found an unexpected sense of purpose amid the chaos. This, at least, she understood. This, she could do something about. A young pack member named Owen was carried in an hour into the chaos, his leg bent at an angle that made Elena's stomach turn, blood soaking through his jeans faster than the makeshift bandages could absorb it. Nathan was still occupied with another critical case, and for a terrifying moment, no one else in the room seemed to know what to do beyond applying pressure and hoping. "Move," Elena said, sliding into position beside him, her voice carrying the same commanding authority she used in the emergency room during a code. "I need scissors, gauze, and something rigid to stabilize this before he goes into shock." Grace, despite her own injury, scrambled to gather supplies, following Elena's directions without question. Elena worked quickly, cutting away the ruined fabric of Owen's jeans, assessing the break with practiced eyes, relieved to find the bleeding was severe, but not from a major artery. "You're going to be okay," she told Owen firmly, meeting his frightened eyes as she worked. "I need you to breathe with me. In through your nose, slow, that's it." "It hurts," Owen gritted out, barely more than a teenager, his enhanced healing clearly not fast enough to outpace the pain of a fresh break. "I know, it's going to keep hurting for a little while, but you're not going to lose this leg, and you're not going to bleed out, I promise you that." Elena secured the splint she had fashioned from a broken chair leg and firm bandaging, watching his breathing steady slightly, under her calm, confident direction. By the time Nathan finally freed himself from his previous patient to check on Owen, the boy was stable, color returning to his face, the makeshift splint holding the break securely in place. "Clean work," Nathan said, genuine surprise coloring his voice as he examined Elena's handiwork. "You could have a place on my medical staff permanently, if you ever wanted one." "Let's get through today first," Elena said, though something warm settled in her chest at the compliment, at being useful in a world that had upended everything she thought she understood about reality only days earlier. Hours passed before the fighting outside finally quieted. Elena had just finished bandaging her 6th patient when the door burst open and Cade appeared, blood streaking across his shoulder, a shallow gash healing slowly along his ribs, but alive, and moving under his own strength. "You were supposed to stay in your room," he said, though the fury in his voice was tempered by obvious relief at seeing her safe. "And let people bleed while I hid upstairs? Not a chance." Elena crossed the room immediately, pulling him toward an empty chair, her hands already moving to assess his injuries with practiced efficiency. "Sit down, let me look at this." Cade obeyed, too tired to argue, watching her work with an expression she couldn't quite name, something caught between exasperation and awe. "You're not afraid of any of this," he said quietly. "The blood, the danger. Most humans would have run the moment the alarm sounded." "I told you," Elena said, cleaning the wound along his ribs with careful hands. "I'm not most humans. I've spent my whole career walking toward the chaos other people run from." "Damon's forces retreated," Cade said after a moment, his voice tight with exhaustion. "We held the border, but it cost us. 3 pack members are seriously injured. None fatal, but it was close." "And Damon?" "Retreated with his remaining forces. This was a test, not a full invasion. He wanted to see how hard we'd fight to protect you." Cade's jaw tightened, gold eyes darkening. Now he knows the answer. Elena finished bandaging his ribs, her hands lingering slightly longer than necessary against his skin, feeling the steady, powerful heartbeat beneath her fingertips. "This is my fault," she whispered. "People got hurt because of me." "No." Cade's voice was firm, immediate, leaving no room for argument. He caught her hand gently, forcing her to meet his eyes. "This is Damon's fault, for choosing violence over diplomacy. You are not responsible for another man's cruelty, Elena. Don't carry that weight." "It's hard not to." "I know," he said softly, "but you're not carrying it alone anymore." The room around them had emptied slowly, as other pack members finished treatment and returned to their posts, leaving Elena and Cade in a rare pocket of quiet amid the aftermath of battle. She studied his face, the exhaustion carved into every line, the way his shoulders, usually so rigidly controlled, now sagged slightly under the weight of the day. "When was the last time you actually rested?" she asked. "Not patrolled, not planned, not fought, actually rested." Cade considered the question for a long moment, as if genuinely searching his memory for an answer. "I don't remember," he admitted finally. "Leading a pack doesn't leave much room for rest. There's always another threat, another decision, another life depending on the choices I make." "That's not sustainable," Elena said gently, her nursing instincts recognizing exhaustion when she saw it, the kind that went beyond physical tiredness into something deeper, something that had been accumulating for years. "Even alphas need to sleep, Cade." "Maybe," he said, though the doubt in his voice suggested he didn't fully believe it. "But rest requires trust. It requires believing, even for a moment, that the world won't fall apart if I close my eyes." "And you don't trust that?" "I haven't had reason to," Cade said quietly. "Not in a very long time." Elena reached out, hesitant but certain, and gently took his hand, lacing her fingers through his. "Maybe that's starting to change," she said. Something shifted in his expression, a vulnerability so raw and unfamiliar that she wondered if anyone else had ever seen it. This powerful alpha, feared across territories, sitting exhausted and bleeding in a makeshift medical room, looking at her like she was the first safe thing he had found in years. Maybe, he echoed softly, and for the first time since she had met him, Elena saw something close to hope flicker behind his golden eyes. 3 days after the attack on the border, Elena found herself settling into a rhythm at the Pack estate that felt strangely, unexpectedly, like home. Her grandmother's health had already begun to improve under Nathan's care, color returning to Margaret's cheeks, strength creeping back into her voice as she traded stories with Pack members who visited her room out of genuine curiosity rather than obligation. Elena spent her mornings helping in the medical wing, her afternoons exploring the vast grounds, and her evenings, more often than not, in Cade's company, though neither of them ever quite named what was growing between them. It was on the 4th evening, during a long and difficult Pack Council meeting that stretched past midnight, that Elena first witnessed the true weight Cade carried every single day. She had brought tea to his study, expecting to drop it off and leave, but found herself lingering in the doorway as she overheard the tail end of a heated debate between Cade and his senior Pack members. "The border patrols need doubling," Dorian was saying, frustration evident in his voice. "We can't keep spreading our forces this thin, not with Damon testing our defenses every other week." "I'm aware of our limitations," Cade said, his voice steady, despite the exhaustion Elena could hear beneath it. "Pull 2 teams from the northern perimeter and reassign them east. It's not ideal, but it's what we have. And if Damon attacks from the north while we're focused east? Then we adapt," Cade said, "the same way we always adapt, because that's the job." A third Pack member, a broad-shouldered man named Victor who served as Cade's weapons master, pressed further, his frustration evident. "We also need to address the supply routes. If Damon decides to cut off our southern trade partners, we'll be stretched even thinner than we already are." "I've already reached out to the Hartley Pack about alternative arrangements," Cade said without hesitation, his mind clearly running through contingencies he had already mapped out days in advance. "If negotiations with Damon fail entirely, we'll have a backup in place within the week." "You think of everything," Victor muttered, shaking his head with something between admiration and exhaustion. "Don't you ever stop calculating." "I can't afford to," Cade said simply, and something in his flat, tired tone made even Victor pause before nodding and returning to his seat. The meeting continued for another 20 minutes, decision after decision falling on Cade's shoulders alone, each choice weighed against lives, resources, and the constant threat of a war he was trying desperately to prevent. Elena watched from the doorway, understanding for the first time just how relentless his responsibilities truly were, how little space existed in his life for anything resembling peace. When the last Pack member finally left, Cade sank into the chair behind his desk, pressing his palms against his tired eyes, his usual iron composure cracking slightly now that no one else remained to witness it. "You've been standing there a while," he said without looking up, his enhanced senses apparently having noticed her long before she realized. "I didn't want to interrupt," Elena said, stepping fully into the room and setting the tea down beside him. That looked exhausting. "It's always exhausting," Cade admitted, finally lifting his head to look at her, dark circles shadowing his golden eyes. "Every decision I make affects hundreds of lives. There's no room for mistakes, no room to simply react without thinking 3 steps ahead. When was the last time someone made a decision for you? Even a small one?" Cade considered the question, genuine confusion crossing his features, as if the concept itself was foreign to him. "I don't think anyone ever has," he admitted slowly. "Then let me," Elena said, gently taking his hand and guiding him up from the chair. "Come outside with me. Just for a few minutes. No meetings, no decisions, no border patrols." He didn't argue, following her out onto the wide porch that overlooked the darkened forest, the night air cool and quiet after the intensity of the council meeting. Elena settled onto the wooden bench positioned against the porch railing, and after a moment's hesitation, Cade sat down beside her, close enough that his shoulder pressed lightly against hers. "This is nice," he said quietly, tilting his head back to look at the stars scattered across the clear night sky. "I don't think I've looked up like this in years. See, small decisions aren't so bad." He huffed out something close to a laugh. soft and unguarded, a sound Elena hadn't heard from him before. You make it sound simple. It can be, sometimes. You just have to let it. They sat together in comfortable silence, the weight of the world momentarily suspended around them, and Elena found herself acutely aware of every point where their bodies touched, the warmth radiating from him despite the cool night air. Slowly, she felt him relax beside her, his usually rigid posture softening degree by degree, the tension bleeding out of his shoulders as the minutes passed. "Can I ask you something?" Elena said quietly, careful not to disturb the fragile peace settling over them. "Anything. Earlier, you said you haven't rested in years. Is it just the pack, or is there something else?" Cade was silent for a long moment, and Elena worried she had pushed too far, crossed into territory he wasn't ready to share. But then he spoke, his voice low and careful, like a man testing ground he wasn't sure would hold his weight. "My parents were killed when I was young," he said. "Betrayed by someone within our own pack, someone we trusted completely. I was the one who found them. I was 17, and I became alpha that same night, whether I was ready or not." Elena's chest tightened at the raw grief still evident in his voice, even after all these years. "Cade, I'm so sorry. Since that night, I haven't let myself fully relax, not once. Because the moment I stop watching, stop calculating every threat, that's when everything falls apart. That's what happened to my parents. They trusted the wrong person, and it cost them everything." "That must be an unbearable weight to carry alone," Elena said softly. "It is," Cade admitted. "But it's the weight that comes with this position. I accepted that a long time ago." Elena reached over, gently taking his hand again, lacing her fingers through his, the way she had in the medical room days before. "You don't have to carry all of it alone anymore," she said. "Not every moment. Not with me." Cade turned to look at her, something fragile and hopeful breaking through the exhaustion etched into his features. He didn't respond with words, simply studying her face in the dim porch light, as if trying to memorize every detail of this rare, unguarded moment. The minutes stretched on, comfortable and quiet, the sounds of the forest settling around them, distant and peaceful compared to the chaos of the past week. Elena felt Cade's breathing slow gradually beside her, his grip on her hand loosening slightly, his head tilting almost imperceptibly toward her shoulder. She held perfectly still, barely daring to breathe, as the most feared alpha in werewolf history, a man who hadn't allowed himself a full night's rest in over a decade, finally let his guard down completely. His head came to rest against her shoulder, his breathing deepening into the slow, even rhythm of genuine sleep, his powerful frame relaxing against her for the first time since she had known him. Elena sat frozen for a long moment, overwhelmed by the significance of what was happening, before a soft, warm smile spread across her face. Carefully, so as not to wake him, she shifted just slightly to support his weight more comfortably, watching the tension finally drain completely from his features, as sleep claimed him. Grace found them there 20 minutes later, pausing in the doorway with wide, astonished eyes, at the sight of her alpha, the most powerful and feared leader in their world, sleeping peacefully, against a human woman's shoulder, under the open night sky. "He hasn't slept like that in years," Grace whispered, careful not to disturb the scene. "Not since before his parents died." "I know," Elena whispered back, gently brushing a strand of hair from Cade's forehead. "I'm not going anywhere." "Can I ask you something?" Grace whispered, lingering a moment longer despite herself. "Of course. Are you scared? Of all of this, of what he is, of what being his mate actually means long-term?" Elena considered the question honestly, glancing down at Cade's peaceful, sleeping face resting against her shoulder. "A little," she admitted quietly, "but less than I expected to be. Everything about this world is strange and dangerous, but he isn't. Not to me." Grace's expression softened into something warm and genuine. "For what it's worth, the whole pack has been hoping for someone like you for a very long time. We just didn't know we were allowed to hope for it." "That's a lot of pressure," Elena said with a faint, tired laugh. "You're handling it well," Grace said, offering a reassuring smile, before glancing toward the door. "I should let you two have this. Call if you need anything." Grace smiled softly, understanding passing between the two women without need for further words, before quietly retreating back inside and leaving them alone beneath the stars. Elena stayed exactly where she was for hours, watching over the sleeping Alpha, feeling something settle deep within her chest, certain, warm, and undeniable. Whatever this bond was, whatever fate had decided for them both, she was no longer afraid of it. News of Cade falling asleep on the porch spread through the Pack estate faster than any battle report ever had. By morning, whispers followed Elena everywhere she walked, curious glances from Pack members who had apparently never witnessed their Alpha show a single moment of vulnerability in years. She tried to ignore the attention, focusing instead on her grandmother's continued recovery, but the weight of unspoken questions followed her through every hallway. It was Dorian who finally approached her directly, finding her alone in the garden, where she often retreated for quiet moments between shifts in the medical wing. "You should know something about him," Dorian said without preamble, settling onto the bench across from her, with the easy confidence of someone who had earned his position through loyalty rather than fear. "About why last night meant more than you probably realize." "I'm listening," Elena said, setting aside the book she had been only half reading. "I've served under Cade since we were both teenagers," Dorian began. "I was there the night his parents died. I helped him become Alpha before either of us had any idea what that title would actually cost him." He paused, choosing his words carefully. The Pack member who betrayed his parents wasn't a stranger. It was his father's own brother, someone Cade had called uncle his entire life. Elena's breath caught. His own family. His uncle wanted the Alpha position for himself. He orchestrated an ambush during a supposed peace meeting with a neighboring Pack, arranged for Cade's parents to be isolated and vulnerable. Cade found the bodies hours later, along with evidence proving exactly who was responsible. Dorian's expression darkened at the memory. He hunted his own uncle down within a week. Ended the threat personally, the way Pack law demanded. "That's an unimaginable thing to carry," Elena said quietly. "It changed him completely," Dorian continued. "Before that night, Cade was different, warmer, quicker to laugh, more trusting. Afterward, he built walls around himself that nothing could break through. He decided trust was a weakness that got people killed, and he spent the last decade proving that theory correct, refusing to let anyone close enough to matter. Until now," Elena said softly. Dorian's expression shifted into something almost like relief. "Until now," he agreed. "I've watched that man carry the weight of an entire Pack alone for years, refusing help, refusing rest, refusing anything that resembled genuine connection. Then you appeared, and within a week, I watched him fall asleep on a porch bench, like the world wasn't ending around him." He met her eyes directly. "Whatever this bond is between you two, it's already succeeding where the rest of us failed for a decade." Elena absorbed his words carefully, understanding now the true significance of what had happened the previous night, the depth of trust Cade had unknowingly extended to her, simply by allowing himself to rest in her presence. "I don't want to hurt him," she said finally. "I know this is complicated, the bond, the danger, everything happening so fast, but I care about him already, more than I probably should this soon." "Fate doesn't usually care about timelines," Dorian said with a small smile. "For what it's worth, the Pack already trusts you. That's not something easily earned around here." Their conversation was interrupted by Cade himself, appearing at the garden entrance with an expression of genuine embarrassment that looked entirely out of place on his usually composed features. "Dorian, don't you have patrol duties?" Cade asked, though the mild exasperation in his voice held no real heat. "Just keeping our guest company, Alpha," Dorian said, rising with an easy grin before offering Elena a respectful nod and departing toward the training grounds. Cade watched him go before turning his attention fully to Elena, an unfamiliar shyness in his posture that she hadn't witnessed before. "I owe you an apology," he said, "falling asleep like that, without any warning, without your permission. That wasn't fair to you." "Cade," Elena said gently, standing to close the distance between them, "you don't need to apologize for trusting me." "It's not something I do easily," he admitted. "I know. Dorian told me a little about what happened to your parents." She watched his expression carefully, gauging his reaction to the mention of his past. Something flickered across his face. Old grief mixed with reluctant relief that someone finally understood without requiring him to relive every painful detail himself. "Then you understand why trust doesn't come naturally to me." "I understand completely," Elena said. But you fell asleep anyway. Some part of you already trusts me, even if the rest of you is still fighting that instinct. Cade reached out, gently tucking a strand of hair behind her ear, his touch feather-light and careful, as if she were something precious he was still learning how to handle. That terrifies me, he admitted quietly. Everyone I've ever trusted completely has either died or betrayed me. I don't know how to protect myself from that possibility with you. Maybe you don't have to protect yourself from me, Elena said softly. Maybe you just have to let this be different. They stood together in the quiet garden, the morning sun filtering gently through the trees above them, and for a long moment, neither of them spoke, simply existing together in the fragile, growing space between fear and trust. There's something else you should know, Cade said eventually, his expression sobering. Damon sent a formal message this morning. He's requesting a meeting, a negotiation, to discuss territory boundaries and what he calls, quote, the matter of your human companion. He wants to discuss me directly? He wants to assess the situation for himself, Cade said grimly. Determine whether the rumors of a human mate are true, and if so, how he might use that information to his advantage. Are you going to accept the meeting? Cade's jaw tightened, weighing the decision carefully. I don't see another option. Refusing would be seen as weakness, an admission that I have something to hide, something vulnerable enough to fear exposing. Accepting means walking into a room with a man who has already tried once to use you against me. What do your instincts tell you? Elena asked. That there's no version of this meeting that doesn't carry significant risk, Cade admitted. But some risks have to be taken, especially when the alternative is allowing Damon to believe he can dictate the terms of this conflict indefinitely. Then we prepare for it, Elena said, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. Together. Cade studied her for a long moment, something like awe passing behind his golden eyes at her unwavering resolve in the face of genuine danger. You continue to surprise me, Elena Marsh. Get used to it, she said, offering him a small, determined smile, despite the fear still churning beneath her calm exterior. I'm not going anywhere. Behind his careful composure, Elena could see the beginning of a war. Cade hadn't yet decided how to fight. The tension between protecting her by keeping her hidden and respecting her strength enough to let her stand beside him, against whatever Damon Cole intended to bring to their doorstep. Whatever the coming days held, one thing had become undeniably clear to both of them. The bond between them was no longer something either of them wanted to fight against. It was something worth protecting, no matter the cost. The Pack Council chamber fell silent the moment Cade announced his decision to bring Elena to the negotiation with Damon Cole. Elder Edwin, the oldest and most respected voice among the senior Pack members, rose slowly from his seat, his weathered face lined with open disapproval. Absolutely not, Edwin said, his voice carrying decades of authority. Bringing a human, your mate, into a room with Damon Cole is reckless beyond reason. You would be handing him exactly the leverage he's been searching for. Leaving her behind carries its own risks, Cade replied evenly, though Elena could see the tension building in his shoulders at being challenged so directly. If Damon believes he can act against her while I'm distracted with negotiations, he will. Keeping her close, under my direct protection, eliminates that possibility. Or it hands him a target within arm's reach, another elder argued, a stern woman named Corinne, who had served the Pack Council for longer than Elena had been alive. This is precisely the vulnerability we feared when rumors of a human mate first surfaced. She complicates everything, Cade. Every decision, every negotiation, every strategic consideration, now has to account for her safety instead of the Pack's. Elena felt heat rise to her face at being discussed, as though she weren't standing directly in the room, but she held her tongue, understanding that interrupting a Pack Council meeting would only reinforce the elders' concerns, rather than ease them. With respect, Cade said, his voice hardening slightly, the decision is mine to make, as Alpha. And if that decision costs us the war we've been trying to avoid, Edwin pressed, Damon has wanted an excuse to challenge your territory for years. A human mate, someone outside Pack law, outside Pack protection traditions, gives him exactly the justification he needs to claim you've grown weak, unfit to lead. The words landed like a blow, and Elena watched Cade's expression tighten, old insecurities clearly resurfacing beneath his controlled exterior. Before he could respond, Elena stepped forward, unable to remain silent any longer. May I speak? she asked, addressing the council directly, despite the surprised murmurs that followed her interruption. Edwin studied her for a long moment, before offering a curt nod. Given that this entire discussion concerns you, I suppose that's only fair. I understand your concerns, Elena began, keeping her voice steady despite her racing heart. I'm not naive about the danger my presence introduces into this situation. But hiding me away doesn't eliminate that danger, it simply removes my ability to help protect myself, or to give Cade accurate information about my own safety in real time. This isn't about your competence, Corinne said, not unkindly. It's about strategic vulnerability that puts the entire pack at risk. Then let me ask you this, Elena said, meeting the elder's gaze directly. If Damon truly wants to use me as leverage, doesn't hiding me away simply confirm that I'm valuable enough to hide? Doesn't it prove exactly what he's trying to determine? That Cade has something precious enough to protect at all costs? Silence fell across the chamber, as the council members considered her point. Cade watched her with something close to pride, flickering behind his carefully neutral expression. Whereas if I attend the meeting, Elena continued, calm, unafraid, standing beside Cade as an equal, rather than hidden away like a secret, it sends an entirely different message. It shows Damon that intimidation tactics won't work, that neither of us can be manipulated through fear. Edwin's stern expression softened slightly, though skepticism remained evident in his eyes. That's either remarkably brave or remarkably foolish, young woman. Perhaps it's both, Elena said, offering a small, determined smile. But I've spent 6 years walking into emergency situations most people run away from. I don't intend to start hiding now. A long silence stretched through the chamber, before Edwin finally spoke again, his voice carrying grudging respect. Cade, your mate has a spine of iron. I'll grant her that much. She does, Cade agreed, unable to fully hide the warmth in his voice, despite the formal setting. Very well, Edwin said finally. I still believe this carries significant risk, but I won't stand in the way of the Alpha's decision, especially not when his mate has argued her position so effectively. He turned his attention to Elena directly. Understand this, though. If you attend this meeting, you will be expected to conduct yourself according to pack protocol. No fear, no hesitation, regardless of what tactics Damon Cole attempts to use against you. I understand, Elena said firmly. Corinne raised a hand partway through the security discussion, her earlier skepticism tempered now by practical concern rather than outright opposition. If she's attending, she needs to understand pack signals, the nonverbal cues we use to communicate danger, without alerting outsiders. A raised hand means retreat. 2 fingers against the collarbone means hold position. If Cade touches your shoulder twice in quick succession, it means move behind him immediately, no hesitation. I can remember that, Elena said, committing the signals to memory with the same focus she used memorizing medication dosages. She learns quickly, Dorian observed approvingly from across the table. She'll need to, Edwin said, though his tone had lost most of its earlier hostility. Damon Cole does not offer second chances to those who hesitate in his presence. The council meeting continued for another hour, discussing security arrangements, contingency plans, and the specific terms Cade intended to negotiate regarding territory boundaries. Elena listened carefully, absorbing every detail, understanding the full complexity of the situation she had chosen to insert herself into. Later that evening, as the estate settled into quiet darkness, Elena found Cade alone in his study, reviewing documents by lamplight, exhaustion evident in the set of his shoulders. You didn't have to defend yourself like that today, Cade said as she entered, not looking up from his papers. I would have found another way to convince the council. I know, Elena said, settling into the chair across from his desk. But I wanted them to understand that I'm not just something you need to protect. I can be an asset too, if you let me. Cade finally looked up, setting his papers aside completely, his golden eyes studying her with an intensity that made her breath catch. You've already become more of an asset than you realize, he said quietly. Not just in negotiations or strategy, Elena. In everything. What do you mean? Before you, I led this pack through sheer force of will alone. Isolation, disguised as strength. I convinced myself that was the only way to survive, the only way to protect everyone who depended on me. He paused, choosing his words carefully. You've shown me a different kind of strength exists. one built on connection rather than isolation. That's not a small thing you've given me. Elena's chest tightened with emotion at his admission, the weight of everything unspoken between them settling into something clearer, more certain. I'm scared about tomorrow, she admitted softly. Meeting Damon, understanding exactly what kind of danger he represents. But I'm more scared of the alternative, of hiding away, while you face all of this alone. You won't be alone in facing it either, Cade said, rising from his desk to close the distance between them. Whatever happens tomorrow, we face it together. Together, Elena echoed, the words settling into her chest with quiet, unshakable certainty. Outside the study window, storm clouds gathered on the horizon, dark and heavy with the promise of rain, mirroring the uncertainty that awaited them both, in the meeting that would determine far more than either of them yet realized. But for this quiet moment, standing close together in the lamplight, neither of them looked away from what was coming. They faced it together, exactly as promised. The neutral meeting ground sat exactly on the border between Ashworth and Cole territory, a wide clearing surrounded by ancient trees, chosen generations ago as the traditional site for negotiations between rival packs. Elena stood beside Cade as Damon Cole's convoy approached, her heart hammering despite the calm expression she forced onto her face. Damon emerged from his vehicle with the confident swagger of a man who had never doubted his own power, his dark eyes immediately locking onto Elena with open, calculating interest. He was tall, though not quite as imposing as Cade, his presence carrying a cold, reptilian quality that made Elena's instincts scream warning, even before he spoke a single word. So the rumors were true, Damon said, circling closer with unhurried steps. The great Cade Ashworth, brought low by a human woman. Careful, Damon, Cade said, his voice deceptively calm despite the tension radiating from his frame. We're here to discuss territory boundaries, not my personal affairs. Everything about you is my business now, Damon replied, his gaze never leaving Elena. A weakness like this changes the entire balance of power between our packs. The negotiation that followed stretched for nearly 2 hours, tense and calculated, both alphas testing boundaries and pushing advantages with careful precision. Elena remained composed throughout, exactly as she had promised, offering nothing that could be used against Cade, despite Damon's repeated attempts to provoke a reaction from her. At one point, Damon shifted tactics entirely, addressing Elena directly with a tone that mimicked polite curiosity. Tell me, Miss Marsh, doesn't it concern you, binding your life to someone who exists in constant danger? Humans are fragile things in our world. One mistake, one moment of poor timing, and you become a casualty rather than a mate. Every profession carries risk, Elena replied evenly, refusing to let the calculated jab rattle her composure. I've spent 6 years working emergency medicine. I understand danger, and I understand choosing to stand in it anyway, because something matters more than my own comfort. Damon's eyes narrowed slightly, clearly having expected a more emotional reaction. Confident words for someone who has no real understanding of what our world can do to those unprepared for it. Perhaps, Elena said, holding his gaze steadily. Or perhaps you're simply unused to humans who don't frighten easily. Cade said nothing, but Elena felt his hand find hers briefly beneath the negotiating table, a silent, steady show of support that grounded her through the remainder of the tense exchange. Damon, sensing the tactic had failed to produce the reaction he wanted, redirected the conversation back toward territorial boundaries with visible irritation. By the time the meeting concluded, a fragile agreement had been reached, temporary and unsatisfying, but enough to delay outright conflict for the time being. As they prepared to leave, Damon approached Elena directly, one final time, his voice dropping low enough that only she could hear. Enjoy this peace while it lasts, he murmured. It won't. The threat lingered in Elena's mind long after they returned to the estate, a persistent unease she couldn't fully shake, despite Cade's reassurances. 3 days later, that unease proved justified. Elena had gone into town alone, against her better judgment, but desperate for a few hours of normalcy. A simple errand to pick up medication for her grandmother that Nathan needed from a specific pharmacy. She never made it back. Cade felt the bond shatter into panic the moment something happened, an instinctive, visceral alarm that sent him sprinting from the estate before Dorian had even finished relaying the message that Elena's car had been found abandoned, on a quiet road outside town, the driver's door open, her phone shattered on the pavement nearby. "Track everything," Cade ordered, his voice a low, dangerous growl that silenced the chaos erupting around him. "Every camera, every witness, every scent trail. I want her found within the hour." The trail led, unsurprisingly, toward coal territory, but something about the scent pattern troubled Dorian as they followed it. "This isn't Damon's usual method," he said, crouching to examine tire tracks near the abandoned car. "Too clean, too careful. This was planned in advance, executed with precision. Damon's forces don't typically show." Cade's jaw tightened, as a horrifying possibility began forming in his mind. "Someone gave him information," he said. "Someone who knew Elena's schedule, her route into town, details that shouldn't have left this pack." The betrayal, when it was uncovered an hour later, came from an unexpected source. Liam, a younger pack member who had served under Cade for nearly 5 years, was found nervously packing his belongings in his quarters, clear evidence of recent communication with Damon's forces discovered on his phone. "Why?" Cade demanded, fury barely contained beneath his controlled exterior, as Dorian and Grace restrained the trembling young man. "Damon promised my family protection," Liam stammered, tears streaking his face. "My sister. She's mated to someone in his pack. He threatened to hurt her, unless I gave him information about Elena's movements. I didn't know he'd actually take her, I swear." Cade's control fractured for the first time since Elena had entered his life, raw fury bleeding through his careful composure. "You handed my mate to a man who wants to destroy everything I've built, and you didn't think there would be consequences?" "Cade," Grace said carefully, stepping between him and Liam. "We need him coherent enough to tell us exactly where Damon is holding her. Anger later. Answers now." The reminder pulled Cade back from the edge, barely, his hands trembling with restrained violence as he forced himself to focus on what mattered most. "Where is she?" Liam provided the location with shaking hands, a remote property on the outskirts of Damon's territory, heavily guarded but not impossible to breach for a force determined enough. Within 20 minutes, Cade had assembled his strongest fighters, moving with the terrifying efficiency of a man who had spent his entire life preparing for exactly this kind of crisis. Meanwhile, in a locked room within Damon's compound, Elena sat with her wrists bound, assessing her surroundings with the same clinical focus she brought to every emergency situation, refusing to let fear override her ability to think clearly. The room was sparse, a single window too small to escape through, a locked door guarded by at least 2 men she could hear pacing outside. Damon entered nearly an hour after her capture, studying her with cold satisfaction. "You're remarkably calm for someone in your position," he observed. "Panicking won't help me," Elena said evenly, refusing to give him the reaction he clearly wanted. "What exactly do you think this accomplishes, Damon?" "Leverage," he said simply. "Cade will do anything to get you back safely, including surrendering territory he's spent years defending. Your capture accomplishes what months of negotiation and posturing never could." "You're underestimating him," Elena said quietly, "and you're underestimating me." Damon's smile faltered slightly at the certainty in her voice, though he quickly masked it with renewed confidence. "We'll see how confident you remain once he arrives, and realizes exactly how outmatched his forces are against mine." But even as he spoke, distant sounds began echoing through the compound. Shouts, the crash of something breaking, the unmistakable chaos of an assault beginning far sooner and far more violently than Damon had anticipated. His expression shifted from confidence into genuine alarm as the sounds grew closer, more intense, accompanied by a low, furious growl that seemed to shake the very walls around them. Earlier, while waiting alone in that locked room, Elena had spent the quiet, frightening minutes doing what she always did under pressure, cataloging details, searching for anything useful. She had counted footsteps outside the door, noted the guards change shifts roughly every 30 minutes, and memorized the layout of the hallway she had glimpsed before being shoved inside. It wasn't much, but it was something, a small measure of control in a situation designed to strip it away entirely. She had also thought of Cade, not with despair but with something closer to certainty, replaying every moment since the night of the accident, the careful way he protected without smothering, The vulnerability he had shown falling asleep against her shoulder. The fierce devotion in his voice every time he promised to keep her safe. Whatever fear lived in her chest during those long minutes of waiting, it never once included doubt that he would come. Elena felt something settle in her chest despite the danger, a fierce, unshakable certainty. Cade had come for her, exactly as he'd promised, and whatever Damon Cole had planned for this confrontation, he had severely underestimated the fury of an alpha fighting to protect what mattered most to him. The door to her room shuddered under a powerful blow, and Elena braced herself, ready for whatever came next, trusting completely in the bond that had brought them together, and the man who would move mountains, rather than let anything happen to her. The door exploded inward, splinters scattering across the room as Cade appeared through the wreckage, his golden eyes blazing with a fury Elena had never witnessed from him before. For one suspended moment, he simply looked at her, confirming she was unharmed, before turning his attention fully toward Damon, with an intensity that made the other alpha take an involuntary step backward. "You made a mistake," Cade said, his voice low and terrifyingly controlled, more dangerous than any shout could have been. "Cade, wait," Damon started, his earlier confidence completely evaporated in the face of the storm he had unleashed. "There is no negotiation left," Cade interrupted, advancing slowly, deliberately, each step radiating barely restrained power. "You crossed a line that cannot be uncrossed. You touched what belongs to me." Behind him, Dorian and Grace secured the room's exits, ensuring no reinforcements could interfere, while sounds of ongoing conflict echoed from elsewhere in the compound as the rest of Cade's forces neutralized Damon's remaining guards. Elena watched, still bound, as Damon attempted to backpedal from a confrontation he had clearly never expected to actually face. "This doesn't have to end in violence," Damon said, his voice cracking slightly under the pressure of Cade's approach. "Release me, and I'll withdraw all claims to the disputed territory. I'll leave you and your mate alone permanently. You should have considered that offer before you kidnapped her," Cade said, his voice devoid of any mercy. Elena, watching the confrontation unfold, understood in that moment the full truth of what everyone had been telling her since her arrival at the Pack estate. Cade Ashworth had earned his fearsome reputation through exactly this kind of controlled, devastating fury, a man capable of ending threats with terrifying efficiency when those he protected were endangered. "Cade," she said quietly, her voice cutting through the tension in the room. He paused, glancing back at her, some of the murderous focus in his eyes softening slightly at her voice. "I'm safe," she continued. "He didn't hurt me. Ending him here, now, it won't undo what already happened, and it will only start a war that costs more lives than this moment is worth." The room fell silent as everyone processed her words, Damon's eyes widening with disbelief that the woman he had kidnapped was now advocating, in some fashion, for his survival. Cade's jaw remained tight, the internal battle between instinct and reason evident in every line of his tense frame. "She's right, Cade," Dorian said carefully from the doorway. "A dead alpha creates chaos within his pack, potential successors fighting for control, more instability than a defeated but living alpha would." Several long seconds passed before Cade finally exhaled, some of the lethal tension bleeding from his shoulders, though his eyes remained hard and unforgiving as he addressed Damon directly. "You will formally surrender all claims to the disputed territory, in writing, witnessed by neutral pack elders. You will never approach my mate again, never send anyone from your pack near her family, or near anything that belongs to me. If you violate these terms in any way, I will not show restraint a second time." "Understood," Damon said quickly, relief evident in his shaking voice. "Completely understood." "Grace, secure him until the paperwork is finalized," Cade ordered, finally turning fully away from Damon to cross the room toward Elena, gently working at the restraints binding her wrists with careful, controlled movements, despite the lingering fury still simmering beneath his composed exterior. "Are you truly unharmed?" he asked, his voice softening entirely, now that his focus had shifted completely to her well-being. "I'm fine," Elena assured him, rubbing her freed wrists, as relief finally allowed her own carefully controlled composure to crack slightly. "Scared, but fine. You came for me." "I will always come for you," Cade said fiercely, pulling her carefully into his arms, his powerful frame trembling slightly with the aftermath of adrenaline and restrained violence. No matter what it costs, no matter who stands in the way. Elena melted into his embrace, finally allowing the fear she had suppressed throughout her captivity to release in a rush of emotion. Tears she hadn't realized she was holding back, finally spilling free. Cade held her steadily, his hand moving in gentle, soothing circles against her back, murmuring quiet reassurances that had nothing to do with pack law or territorial disputes, simply the desperate relief of a man who had nearly lost the one thing that mattered most to him. "I was so afraid," Elena admitted against his chest. "Not for myself, but that something would happen to you trying to reach me." "Nothing could have stopped me from reaching you," Cade said firmly. "Nothing ever will." Behind them, Liam's betrayal still needed to be addressed. The delicate matter of his sister's safety weighed against the severity of his actions, but that conversation could wait until they returned safely to pack territory. For now, standing together in the aftermath of danger successfully overcome, both of them focused only on the undeniable relief of having found their way back to each other. As they finally made their way out of Damon's compound, Elena leaning heavily against Cade's steady support, she glanced back once at the wreckage of the confrontation behind them, understanding fully now the depth of protection and devotion the bond between them truly represented. Whatever challenges still remained ahead, she no longer doubted for even a moment that Cade Ashworth would face every single one of them, standing directly beside her, exactly as he had proven here today, without hesitation, without fear, and without any question of where his loyalty truly belonged. 3 weeks passed before the pack estate finally settled back into a rhythm of genuine peace, the formal surrender documents from Damon Cole filed and witnessed, the border tensions that had defined Cade's existence for years, finally beginning to ease into something resembling stability. Liam's punishment had been decided by the pack elders, exile rather than death. His sister quietly relocated to a protected pack far from Damon's reach, a resolution that balanced justice with the mercy Elena had gently encouraged Cade to consider. Margaret's health had improved dramatically under Nathan's continued care, enough that she had taken to walking the estate gardens each morning, trading stories with pack members who had come to genuinely adore her sharp wit and endless supply of wisdom. She had, in her own quiet way, become as much a fixture of pack life as Elena herself. The pack council, once so resistant to Elena's presence, had shifted their opinion entirely following the events at Damon's compound. Edwin himself had approached her personally to acknowledge her composure and wisdom throughout the crisis, admitting that his earlier concerns had been thoroughly, gladly proven wrong. "You've brought something to this pack that's been missing for a very long time," Edwin told her one afternoon, watching Cade laugh genuinely at something Dorian had said during training, a sound that had become increasingly common in recent weeks. "I haven't seen him this settled since before his parents died." "He deserves peace," Elena said simply. "He does," Edwin agreed, "and it seems fate agreed as well, choosing you to give it to him." That afternoon, Elena joined Sasha and a handful of other pack members for an impromptu gathering near the training yard, the mood light and easy, in a way that would have seemed impossible only weeks before. Owen, his leg fully healed now, jogged past, showing off his recovery to anyone who would watch, grinning when Elena applauded his effort. "You saved his leg, you know," Sasha said, settling beside her on the grass. "Nathan still talks about it, says you've got instincts most trained pack healers take years to develop." "I just did what I was trained to do," Elena said, though the praise warmed something in her chest. "Around here, that makes you family," Sasha said simply, bumping her shoulder affectionately, before jogging off to join the others. Elena watched the pack move around her, children chasing each other near the garden, elders trading stories on a shaded bench, the entire estate humming with a sense of security that had been carefully, painfully earned over the past difficult weeks. She thought of her grandmother, healthier now than she had been in years, and of her own life, transformed so completely from the exhausted, solitary existence she had known only a month earlier. That evening, as the sun began setting over the estate, painting the sky in soft shades of orange and gold, Elena found Cade waiting for her on the same porch where everything between them had truly begun weeks earlier. He looked different now, she thought, studying him as she approached. The perpetual tension that had once defined his posture, softened into something more relaxed, more genuinely present. "You look thoughtful," Kate observed as she settled onto the bench beside him, close enough that their shoulders touched naturally, comfortably. "Just thinking about how much has changed," Elena said. "A month ago, I didn't know werewolves existed. Now I'm sitting here, part of a pack, watching the most feared alpha in history laugh at his second-in-command's terrible jokes." Cade huffed out a soft laugh at that, reaching over to take her hand, lacing their fingers together with an ease that had grown natural between them over the past weeks. "A month ago, I believed rest and trust were luxuries I couldn't afford," he said quietly. "You've proven that theory wrong more times than I can count." "I meant what I said that first night in the garden," Elena reminded him. "You don't have to carry everything alone anymore." "I know," Cade said, his voice carrying quiet wonder at the truth of that statement, finally settling fully into his heart. "I believe that now, completely." They sat together in comfortable silence as the sky deepened into twilight, stars beginning to emerge, one by one, above the darkening tree line, the estate around them, peaceful and secure, in a way it hadn't been since long before Elena's arrival. Somewhere in the distance, pack members' laughter drifted on the evening breeze, a sound of genuine contentment that had become increasingly common throughout the estate. "Can I tell you something?" Kate asked softly. "Always. When I found you that night after the accident, I believed the bond between us was simply fate's decision, something neither of us had chosen, something I would have to learn to accept, despite the danger it introduced into both our lives." He turned to look at her fully, golden eyes warm and unguarded in the fading light. "I understand now that fate only opened the door. Everything that's happened since, the trust we've built, the peace I've found, that's something we chose together, every single day." Elena's chest tightened with emotion at his words, understanding fully the significance of what he was expressing. A man who had spent a decade believing connection meant vulnerability, now openly embracing exactly that vulnerability without fear. "I choose this too," she said softly. "Every day, Cade, I choose you." He leaned down slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away if she wished, before gently pressing his forehead against hers, breathing in the quiet, steady peace that had become as essential to him as breathing itself. "Stay with me," he murmured. "Not just tonight, every night after this one." "I'm not going anywhere," Elena promised, echoing the same words she had spoken weeks earlier, while watching over him as he slept, words that had proven entirely true through every danger and challenge they had faced together since. As true darkness settled fully over the estate, Cade shifted comfortably beside her, his earlier tension completely absent now, replaced by the genuine relaxation of a man who had finally found something worth resting for. His head came to rest against her shoulder once again, exactly as it had that first transformative night, his breathing slowing into the deep, peaceful rhythm of a man completely secure in the safety of the moment. Elena smiled softly, gently wrapping her arm around him, watching the stars multiply across the clear night sky above them both. The most dangerous alpha in history, a man whose name alone had once ended conflicts before they began, slept peacefully against her shoulder, surrounded not by fear or isolation, but by genuine safety, trust, and love. Somewhere beyond the estate's borders, the world continued its usual chaos, other packs, other conflicts, other challenges that would undoubtedly arise in time. But here, in this quiet moment, beneath the stars, none of that mattered. Here, there was only peace, hard-won and deeply deserved, shared between two people who had found in each other exactly what fate had always intended. And for the first time in longer than either of them could remember, that peace felt like it might finally last.